Today we're going to discuss the general trends and ideas behind the chapter approved 2020 Munitorum Handbook. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now we have the full points change list for 9th edition. I thought we'd make a quick video discussing the general trends behind the points cost changes, exactly what models are in the book and which have been left out, and talk in very general terms about which armies seem to have gained and lost the most from this book. Let's jump straight into it. So the Munitorum Handbook is of course one half of the new chapter approved 2020 book, the other one being the Grand Tournament Mission Pack, which we'll take a look at in another video somewhere down the line. This is the one that just literally has the points changes for every single faction, and that includes things like unaligned fortifications, and also some of the more generalised 8th edition releases, such as Blackstone Fortress characters, Elucidian Starstriders, and Galapox Infectors. It's also here that you'll find the points costs for all the Indomitus Space Marines and Necrons, and usually they didn't have the points costs out with them in the box, they're just literally in this book. Probably the most interesting area of note from the Munitorum Handbook are the Forge World changes. The Forge World miniatures are included in this book. I was sort of wondering whether they might hold off on including the points cost until they get round to redoing the Forge World datasheets, as they have been rumoured to be doing. Quite a lot of the Forge World content did go down in points cost or stayed roughly the same. In general, a lot of the units weren't all that powerful compared with some of their Games Workshop equivalent counterparts, so it has been a bit of a chance to redress some balance, although a few units have gone up, such as Leviathan Dreadnoughts, among a few others. However, some Forge World units are missing from the book, which I believe are things that will be going to Warhammer Legends now, as they're just models that Forge World don't sell anymore. In general, I believe that if Forge World don't sell the models, then the points cost won't be included in the book, and in general going to Legends means they're not going to be recommended for competitive play anymore. A notable and expected casualty of this was the Chaplain Dreadnought, very much a staple of the tournament scene, but hasn't had models in absolutely ages. There's also things like the Cestus Assault Ram, Laius Isidon, and all the other Forge World characters that never had models, and the Thunderhawk Transporter, and that's just from the Space Marine side. In general, the rule is that if they had an index datasheet in 8th edition, and Forge World no longer sell the model for it now, then it's likely going to Warhammer Legends. Sadly, this does also account for the Elysian Drop Troops, and the Forge World army list for Renegades and Heretics, both of them gone. I'd be surprised if we don't get Legends rules for them at some stage, but at the moment, their points aren't in this book. Deathcore Krieg still have an extensive range, so they're still here in the book, and hopefully might benefit from some new datasheets and a fresh look at them when Games Workshop gets round to it. It's certainly a shame to lose so many options to competitive play, but I think that the writing has been on the wall for some of these units for quite a long time now. So if we move on to take a look at the actual points cost themselves now. Of course, points cost in 8th and 9th edition are generally split between unit costs and war gear, and both seem to have been updated using slightly different rules. In terms of unit costs, it's interesting to note that no model in the game now costs less than 5 points, including the things that were previously 3 points a model, such as Brimstone Horrors and Gretchen. Both pretty painful changes that mean I don't think they'll be seen play quite as much. In general, typical points increases tend to be around between 10 and 20%, including gear for the unit. So as a general rule of thumb, I'd say that if your models have increased in cost by less than this, then they tend to have received a slight points buff going into 9th edition, and if they've increased by more than this, it'd typically be a slight nerf. I think a lot of the changes were literally made just to represent the new rules in 9th edition, such as for example vehicles often seem to have gone up a reasonable amount seeing as they gained some new abilities, and a lot of characters haven't gone up all that much proportionately, I think because they're just a little bit easier to target these days. In addition to this though, it does look like they've actually addressed balance changes for certain units, and for units that weren't played quite as much, they've often tended to just leave their points cost at the same as it was before, to give them a slight relative buff compared with the other things that went up. Space Marine Hellblasters or Imperial Guard Ogryns are examples of this. They do seem to have hit some things that were doing quite well in the previous meta though. Things like Space Marine Centurions and Whirlwinds and Thunderfire Cannons have all gone up by far more points than average. There also do seem to be a fair few random and slightly punitive points changes to lower point infantry. Things like Gretchen going up from 3 points to 5 is pretty bad for Orc players, as are things like Cavalite Warriors jumping from 6 points to 9, or Chaos Cultists jumping from 4 points to 6. In general, none of these units are really looking anywhere near as attractive as they were before. Moving on to war gear does not seem to have gone up quite as consistently as the unit costs. I think most of the points increases have been done on a unit cost basis rather than a war gear cost. Indeed, it does seem like a lot of war gear has actually gone down in cost on certain models as well as going up. For some reason that I don't think was particularly necessary, Games Workshop have felt the need to try and make virtually all war gear costs in the game into a multiple of 5. For example, in the Imperial Guard army list, you now have grenade launchers and plasma guns both at 5 points, autocannons and heavy bolters at 10, and las cannons and missile launchers at 15. To be honest, I'm really not sure this was a particularly good move. I don't think it really makes army list building all that much easier, to be honest, and it doesn't let them be anywhere near as specific with their points costs. For example, plasma guns were 7 points and got moved to 5 points in the guard army, and grenade launchers were 3 points and also got moved to 5 points. Again, I think just because that was the closest multiple of 5, so now both of these special weapons are pointed the same, even though in pretty much every scenario I prefer to have the plasma gun because it's just a better weapon. I think by making changes like this, you are going to have more cases of just some weapons being flatly better in the same slot than others, just because they don't have the granularity to make one of them very slightly more attractive than another with their points cost. In terms of other weapons, they've also seemed to split the points cost of heavy weapons on infantry and vehicles, such as for example a heavy bolter on infantry being 10 points, whereas taken on a vehicle is 15. Seems reasonably fair enough to me, just because vehicles can move and shoot with no heavy weapon penalty, whereas infantry will typically take the heavy weapon penalty if they're moving and firing with them. They also seem to have gone even further down every single weapon having the same points cost if it's got the same name in different factions. Again, for example, the heavy bolter in Space Marines and Imperial Guard now cost the same, 10 points on infantry, 15 points on vehicles, even though typically Imperial Guardsmen are going to be hitting it on a 4+ and Space Marines on a 3. So at least on normal battle line infantry squads, I just think it's far better to have a heavy bolter on a Space Marine rather than on a Guardsman. I think the main result of this is that heavy bolters just aren't going to be taken on Guardsmen anywhere near as much. Finally, another general theme that I think is a sensible one is that they've tried to internalise unit weapon costs wherever possible. Basically, if one gun is mandatory on multiple units, and you had to pay a points cost for that weapon before, they seem to have tried to fold that points cost within the unit's profile. Say for example the Astra Militarum Primaris Psyker, who's armed with a Force Stave. Previously that Force Stave used to cost him 8 points, now that's been folded into his base unit cost, so the Force Stave is now free, but his base cost is now more points as a result. In general, I think this is fairly sensible just for cleaning up some complex rules. So in general, I'm a fan of plenty of things that they've done with the philosophy of rebalancing things, but maybe a bit less of a fan of some of the others. When taking a look at a bunch of the armies as a whole, it does appear that some of the armies really do seem to have worn out a fair bit more than some of the others. In general, the internet's consensus at the moment that some of the bigger winners out of the chapter approved update are the Death Guard, Imperial Knights, Custodes and Thousand Sons. Interestingly, all quite small and elite armies comparatively. To be fair to them, Imperial Knights themselves might just be seeing some of the benefits of a lot of the rules punishing Titanic vehicles in 9th edition, such as the new terrain rules basically not having much effect on them. On the other end of the spectrum, the AdMech seem to have seen some decent decreases across the board, though I still suspect with all the stacking buffs you can get on them on Engine War, they'll still be a pretty strong faction to contend with. Craftworld Eldar have seen a lot of hefty points increases across the board, as have Genestealer Cults, Orcs and Tyranids unusually. It seems that Games Workshop on the whole hasn't been particularly kind to the Xenos armies in this update. The rest of the factions tend to be somewhere in the middle. In any one of them, certain units might have gone up or down, and I think pretty much everyone's going to be changing their playstyle, at least partially. I will certainly be trying to cover as many of the individual factions as I can over the next few days, talk through some of the percentage points changes, and how I think that it might affect play. If you have any other thoughts on the broad changes of the points cost, then please let me know down in the comments below. It will certainly be good to hear your feedback or clarify anything that I might have missed. If you are interested in seeing some more points changes analysis, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'll certainly be keeping them coming over the next few days. If you've been enjoying the videos and would like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link down in the video description below. Element supplies to the UK and Europe, and supplies Games Workshop's products with a pretty decent discount, and if you click the link before making an order, then a small amount of the money goes to help support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more whatsoever at time of buying. It can just be a way to help support the channel on purchases you are planning to make anyway. I do have a very similar Amazon link for the USA and Canada. Again, if you think about buying anything off Amazon, whether it's Games Workshop products or something completely different, you can just click on the link in the description below, and when you order, a small amount goes to help support the channel. Again, it costs you absolutely nothing extra. But in any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.